Welcome to the Treachery of Data, the CRO Talks podcast and companion to the CRO Roundtable, bite-sized chunk of content summarizing a recent roundtable discussion topic. So today we're going to get into the concept of goals and metrics, specifically focusing on trying to answer the question, what is your primary metric? So First off, let's define the term. So what do we mean by primary metric?
So do you want to, shall I start?
If you want. Because I have my own opinion here and you have your own opinion here. So
yes. So the very basic definition is probably metric you use to make a decision.
At the core, like this is the thing that you're going to ultimately make a decision based off of.
Yeah. And more specifically, it's a metric you use to evaluate the success or the impact of the changes being tested. And that's pretty important for later on. But both of those definitions are pretty simplistic. And I think it's best to expand our vocabulary a little bit here. If we consider now other different types of metrics, there's guardrail metrics, i.e. metrics that are in the part of the test, but metrics that you don't wish harm on, that you hope will improve, but actually you'd be okay with a flat read.
Yeah.
So these are business critical metrics that you just can't harm.
Let's take a step back here a sec and say, so when primary metric, primary meaning the one of most importance. So the implication there is that really you should and will be tracking multiple things in an experiment. Like it's very rare that you're running an experiment and there's only one piece, like one goal or one behavioral thing that you're looking at, right? Like, I mean, we could keep abstracting the term out, like, well, what's a goal? What's a blah, 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 like, so a primary metric is some sort of, even just the concept of a metric in general, right? It's some sort of trackable behavior that you can, measure numerically.
But I think there is something there in terms of, like, if we say a primary metric, and we're going to get into, like, is primary metric always going to be conversion rate? But if a primary metric is there is a inclination in some teams, not saying everywhere, that this is the only metric that they're tracking as part of the test, or
that's incorrect.
This is the key, and this is incorrect. So
it's the most important metric, but it's not the only metric.
Well, I would even argue that point because basically you've got your guardrail metrics, which are all your business critical metrics that you cannot harm as part of the test. You've also got secondary metrics, so other metrics that describe the impact of behavioral sort of metrics.
Providing additional context, like tangentially related things. Like, say, as an example, if you're trying to increase add to cart rate, well, then your tangential metrics might be product page views. Like, what's the path to get to add to cart rate if the test isn't running like already on one of those pages? Like, what are the steps between here and there? Or say you're running like a navigation-based test. Well, then it's like how many users click on the navigation, but then also like how many use search instead, or like is time on page, time on site increased or decreased? Like you're trying to create context around the thing of importance that you're trying to affect.
Yeah. And in general, I think it's for a test, and this is something you mentioned, you're never going to be looking at a single metric. You're going to be looking at a number of metrics. Now, this gets into the whole overall evaluation criteria, which I think is my view is going too far and is a tough one to implement. But the idea is that we have a variety or a bunch of metrics which we then use in order to make a decision. For instance, we wouldn't want to release a test where conversion was increased, but the overall revenue decreased, or we increase
It depends on
conversion.
the context of what you're trying to do. Like there might be a
Yeah,
case where you're trying to improve one thing but decrease another. Like there's a hypothetical valid instance
the
of any
hypothetical. Yeah,
combination of things. It
yeah,
it depends entirely on the context of what you're actually trying to accomplish.
yeah. But in general, you wouldn't want to increase your conversion at the expense of revenue, or increase conversion and increase post sales complaints, for instance. So you mislead people into buying something. So basically, there are a bunch of it's not quite as simple as there's a primary metric, which is the only metric you're using to make a decision based off. It's an important metric to make a decision based off, but it's one of some of those other metrics that then get combined in some sort of way in terms of like when you're making a decision, you have to take into account the primary metric is up, what are the guardrail metrics doing, etc., etc.
Right. And there's this common line of thinking that the bottom end point is always the primary goal. So like on an e-commerce site, it's always going to be uh, order conversion or revenue or average order size or some bottom of funnel metric that you're trying to deliberately increase. Right now,
Mhm.
that's not always the case.
Yeah. So so that leads us to our next question.
Right, which
Right.
is conversion rate always the primary metric?
Okay. So I'll let you go first this time.
Okay. So my opinion there is that conversion rate is not always the primary metric, but also you want to make sure that you have a clear definition of conversion rate, because some of the tools out there, like they have conversion rate listed on every goal, and so it's just there's a nomenclature thing there, and I've run into this with clients many times, often with like new clients where they're looking at like the report in the test tool and they see conversion rate and it's on like three different goals and they're getting confused, like, well, this one says the order conversion rate's going up, but this one says the order conversion rate's going out. Like conversion rate is, no, it's not order conversion rate on e-commerce. Conversion rate is for an individual goal, the percentage of users that are completing that activity, right? So
Mm.
in the vaguest sense of the term, conversion rate is always the primary metric because it's the conversion rate of that particular behavior. That's in a theoretical sense. In a practical sense, that's not true, because most people think conversion rate means order conversion rate. So like, let's make sure that we're not like
Yeah.
artificially conflating the terms there. So
Yeah.
order conversion rate, no, that's not always the primary metric. And I have an approach here that's a little bit different in that. So primary typically means like the one of most importance. And so there's a presumption there that like there's one goal that stands out above all of the others. The approach that I take, though, is that there's two primary metrics. There's a user behavior metric and a business benefit metric.
Mhm.
The user behavior metric is the metric that's at the point of change where you're testing, that you're trying to directly affect the user behavior of. It's the thing that you're like most specifically trying to get the users to do more of, less of, etc. Right? It's the actual behavior that you're interested in changing.
Yeah.
And then the primary business metric is, okay, that user behavior needs to translate to some benefit to the business. So what ultimately, like, what's the cause effect chain there, right? So
Mhm.
as an example, say you have a hypothetical test, like you're changing something about um, the site navigation to try and get more people to view product pages, right? Like you think, oh, there's a gap there of like when people come to the site, and they tend to drop off because they're not finding what they like. The product or category or whatever landing page they landed on might not be the thing for them, but then they navigate around and they get lost and they're not finding what they want. So you want to try and do some sort of clarity change to the navigation. Okay, your primary user behavior metric there is product page views.
Yep.
So you're trying to get more users to view product pages, and you run the test, and it does a great job of that. You're doubling product page view rate. Like, okay, awesome, but if if those users, like, if more of them view product pages, but none of them like you don't ultimately get any more orders off of that, it's a useless change. Like, you're getting more people to view the product page, but you're not getting any more to uh, actually make purchases, right? So you have to find a balance there, right? So the primary business metric is going to be order conversion rate. Like, we have to, like, this change that we have, user behavior that we affect, it ultimately has to drive some sort of business metric as
Yeah,
well. So you
I
have
think
two things that you're looking at of decision making importance.
yeah. So I agree with that definitely. I think in terms of going back to the question, is conversion rate always a primary metric? If you're an agency and you're measured by conversion rates or a CVR or any sort of revenue metric, whatever primary metric that, for instance, your marketing team has agreed upon with the client, then you're going to be pretty fixed in terms of overall. And we go back to the definition of a primary metric being a metric that you use to evaluate the success or impact of changes. You're going to be focused very heavily on the success aspect of that. And as an agency, you're probably going to be measured on conversion rate. And this is kind of where a lot of fixation sort of happens. Otherwise, yes, I do agree with you. Like in terms of from product team, if example, a product team where experimentation is a research or validation tool, or you're basically experimenting to learn, then I think the primary metric is free to move around in terms of like you mentioned, the more nuanced view in terms of based on the specific experiment. Your primary metric could be something like step conversion, where it's about friction, versus CVR, conversion rate, where it's maybe about value proposition or confidence pricing or whatever. I think uh,
It's
the
it's very dependent on context.
it's a context
Just
on the
just like
test.
anything. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And also, if your experimentation program is problem centric, so basically your entire program, you start with a problem and then you hypothesize solutions to those problems and you're going based off of that, then your primary metric could be something related to the problem. Could be something that you know that this problem how do we know if we're solving this problem? Well, this metric
Right.
will give us a
Less
indicating.
of this less of this uh, unbeneficial thing is
Yeah, less
happening,
or even more,
or
depending
right,
on the metric.
right,
Yeah,
right. More
yeah,
more of
and
this positive behavior, less of this negative behavior, right? Again,
yeah,
right. If you're working from a well-structured problem hypothesis statement, it's less of an issue because your goal is self-defined within the hypothesis. If
yeah.
we do this, then that will happen.
And
And
in a
yeah,
way, your the problem will need to be tied to a business goal as well, like you
right,
mentioned before.
right,
So whatever metric that it is that you're looking at, you need to ultimately track it back to a business benefit,
right. How
which I
does
think
that
is
translate to a benefit to the business? Like,
yeah,
just increasing a metric for the sake of increasing it is navel gazing.
yeah. But I think in terms of so let's again, the key thing is not to make a decision based on a single metric.
Mhm.
I think we're both agreed on that. So
Right,
if you do set a primary metric, you don't set your benchmark of whether you accept or reject a hypothesis based on solely the primary metric, because because there's decision consequences of testing, and that decision consequence is having to roll a feature out. So if you are damaging one of your guardrail metrics, then your decision will be divorced, basically, maybe from what the primary metric, whether it's a win or whatever.
Right. Like technically you could be validating the hypothesis, but it's still something you choose not to implement because it's damaging some other thing that would be harmful,
So Matt,
Um,
if we are saying that primary metric is changeable and we're not ever fixed to the primary metric always being the conversion rate, are we not then gaming the system?
I mean, we could talk about how you can cheat. Sure.
You're talking like an expert here.
Yeah. Like here, let's get into all the ways that you can be deceptive.
Yeah.
No, no, it's not gaming the system because you're dealing with the layers of context. Like this is the primary metric within the context of the goal, or not the goal, the test. Like this is the thing that you're trying to affect. And then the next layer out of that is what does that then lead to? Right. So like if increasing this metric lays like, okay, that doesn't provide a direct benefit now, but it's like the first step of a process. Like, okay, if we increase this, then that frees us up to do the next thing that we want to try. Then that's totally okay. Right. I mean, you're also getting into the issue of like how are things reported?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
if there's like this is also a cautionary tale against like doing pay for performance in CRO, because then you're incentivizing like, oh, like we must maintain X% quote unquote win rate. Well, how do you define a win? Like if
exactly.
like
Because a
if
win could
you're
either
if you're like
because
saying like, oh, we got to maintain a 50% win rate, and we get a bonus or something like that. Well, then that's you can cheat by running either like smaller tests that are likely to win but aren't going to be as like directly business impactful, or like you're going to like look at and dig through the report analysis in such a way that it looks like it's going to be a win, right? So you have to be careful about that kind of stuff, and that's why you need to like the primary metric should be clearly defined within the context of like what is going to be beneficial to the business.
Yeah, I want to circle back to one thing you said about the win and defining the win, because a win can either be a monetary win or a win can be hypothesis validated,
Right.
and those are two very separate things. And in terms of if we are, and what I think we're saying here based on the previous question is we're kind of evangelizing a testing to learn philosophy rather than testing to kind of that every single test has to make money, because we want to test to learn and then we track those learnings to the business goal. And
well, there's also something there. So you're saying like make money, like there's the broader like like galaxy brain thought of like, well, CRO is really about risk mitigation. Like you're
but
yeah,
for CRO,
that's a whole right.
That's a whole and also for a CRO agency, they wouldn't be satisfied by saying, we mitigated some risks.
I know,
they're
right?
Really
we've
what
all
they're
been
really
there. Like
after is some,
it's a hard sell to say that.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
how about you pay us to make sure that you're not wasting more
Yeah,
money,
exactly.
right? Yeah,
Exactly.
It's a hard.
So in that case, if we're saying like we're evangelizing testing to learn, then how much does gaming the system even matter? Like, yes, you could game the system, but does it matter if we're testing to learn? I.e., the win is not equal to monetary gain. It's whether or not a hypothesis is validated. Yeah, and if we because basically, if a win equals money, then gaming the system is bad, and if wins are calculated separately in terms of, like how much revenue has been generated by tests altogether or whatever, or which tests have actually been revenue positive, then that's a separate thing, and there's no problem as long as you're doing that separately. So it's all in the messaging, right? So because if you're an agency, then you wouldn't want to you wouldn't want to game the system in terms of, if it's being decided that a win equals money, and that is the mental model that everybody is holding,
right.
then you're misleading people by saying, yeah, we've got a 50% win rate or a 60% win rate.
Well, yeah, and like attaching payment performance based on like win rate, it incentivizes negative behavior in that um, you're you're setting the incorrect primary metric. Like
Yeah.
you can do things like look at a higher funnel metric because that metric will get more sample, so the test could be concluded in a shorter period of time. But then, like you're not demonstrating a causality chain between a behavioral change and a business benefit.
Yeah.
Like tests should always be, well, I shouldn't say it should always be, but ultimately, like you have to have that. How does this actually benefit, like the business, right? So that's the
Yeah.
importance of having.
And I think in terms of like working with lots of product teams and stuff like that, it's I think I see benefits in gaming the system. For instance, there is a previous, like a number of clients that I've worked with. They've had a post decision making issues. So basically, post a test launch, post a test kind of wind down, and you do the analysis of the test. There's a decision making paralysis that sometimes happen. Hey, we're not getting any insights from this test. We don't know what to do, or because they're so focused on conversion rate, them and also the thing that everybody is seeing within the team is, hey, you just kind of like losing a lot in terms of not moving the needle for conversion rate. Whereas if we state from the get-go that shifting the needle for conversion rate is always going to be very, very difficult, that's not to say that it's not a goal that we'd be tracking, but on a test by test basis, in order to help the experimentation flywheel go round and round, it's useful to be learning. And if that primary metric is shifting beyond conversion rate, you do see an increase in the amount of insights that a team is generating. And going back to what we were saying, that those insights in general, with all of these test wins and stuff, they can be then tracked to a business metric like conversion rate. So if you because here's the thing, you're, like we mentioned before, you're always tracking conversion rate as a guardrail metric. It's not like you're just leaving that on the table because you're
Right, you're
making a
not going
decision.
to ignore it because that's the business lifeblood metric.
Yeah, yeah. But I think I think there's a much broader discussion about what experimentation is, which then this leads to, because if it's not about conversion rate and if it's not about monetary gain, it's much more about enabling decision of very good decision making, effective decision making amongst teams,
It's a
wherever they may be.
strategic thing, and the I don't remember where I read this, but it's a little quip that's stuck with me for a while, and it's the strategy is the art of knowing when to say no.
Mm.
It's about avoid like strategy is really about like maintaining focus and of like avoiding distractions and avoiding like negative stuff. And that's really what experimentation is, right? It's risk
Yeah.
mitigation. Like it's a ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure kind of thing, where you test and evaluate something with minim not minimal, but like less effort than it would to like fully construct that thing.
If we rethink experimentation to be a research tool rather than a
Yes.
tool to always increase conversion rate, that kind of broadens the mind and horizons about
Yes,
what experiment can be and what
that's
the
the good
primary
point.
metric can be.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
experimentation is research, right? Like, because
is
lots
research.
of places talk about like we do research and experimentation. No, experimentation is a type of research. Like
Yeah,
research, there's different levels of frequency in which you engage in research, and experimentation is depending on how you think of it, either the lowest level or the highest level that gets the most frequent reps. Like
yeah,
maybe you do a survey once every 6 months to collect intake there for problem identification. But then, right, the experimentation is fed from that to evaluate like, are our solutions actually like, what's the right solution so that we can effectively expend our resources pursuing.
yeah. I know there's a lot of people who disagree with this take. So I think, and I think a lot of those people are kind of no, I'm not going to say that they're all agency led, but yeah, I'll leave put that on the table. That's probably stoking the fire a little bit too much. But yes,
You're starting to tread into troll territory there.
I'm starting to troll people. Yes, yes, I'm starting to really pick fights
With nobody in particular.
with nobody in particular.
Yeah. Um, Now, one thing to consider here as well, because we talk about like, oh, like cheating by, using a higher metric that gets more sample so that you can, come to a conclusion quicker. Well, what do you do if like you just have a smaller sample to work with, period? A common thing is like, well, how do I run experiments on low traffic sites?
I think if we go back to the basics in terms of like you focus, you do some research on problem, and this goes back to the discussion we had last time, where if you focus on stuff that's really going to make a difference for users, those pressure points, those little subtle moves that have big impact, then if you start from there and then create experiments based on that, and if you are shifting the primary metric to be something that's much closer, like not you're not shifting the primary. Well, your primary metric is going to be, as we discussed, is going to be based on the experiment, and your conversion rate is going to be a guardrail metric, and then you can do meta-analysis on the number of experiments that you run on, say, a problem, and then see if on doing the meta-analysis, does that shift the needle for conversion rate. And when it comes to low traffic sites, or even low traffic areas, because every site has low traffic areas, then this is an effective sort of method of working. This is what I've seen anyway, based on my experience.
Yeah, you're balancing the demands of the user with the needs of the business.
Hmm.
Right. Really, right. It's about making sure that they're both in alignment.
Hmm.
Right. Like, you know, uh, affecting, making a change benefits the user in some way, which results in a positive inflow for the business.
Yeah.
All right. Good deal. Well, as always, if any of y'all have questions, feedback, or if you disagree with something we said, and I feel like there might be some disagreement with what we talked about today, you can always talk to me and Iqbal face to face at the CRO Roundtable every Friday at CROTalks.com. And if you're shy or you don't like speaking, you can connect with us on LinkedIn instead. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Catch you next time.